You're listening to the Sisters-in-Laws podcast, a faith-based podcast that spotlights Black women who replace silence with storytelling around pregnancy and infant loss and infertility. Black women experience miscarriage and stillbirth 4 to 5 times more likely than white women, according to the NIH and CDC. Whether you've experienced a miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, are trying to conceive, or have an infertility diagnosis, you will learn about resources and strategies to heal, gain clarity, peace, hope, and find an empowering path forward after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee, and you will hear me interview sisters-in-laws who have healed from such a painful and traumatic experience by sharing their testimonies and stories to inspire and help others turn their pain into their purpose. Now let's get started. Thank you, Danielle, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
What I do. I am a woman who is passionate about what I call whole health. So the physical, emotional, spiritual, physical health of people in general, but particularly women. And so out of that, I am a fitness instructor. I teach yoga and Pilates and spin and TRX. I really enjoy the yoga and the meditation aspects of that, love guiding people through it. I am a mom of 4 boys, so try to encourage them towards whole health. I am a Bible teacher and speaker and am a doula in training.
Yes, awesome. So take us back on your journey to motherhood and share with us your lost story.
Yes, I have kind of a multiple lost story. So I got pregnant with my first son in 2009, but prior to that, I got diagnosed with PCOS. And so when my gynecologist diagnosed me, she said, there's 2 ways we could treat this. There's one way if you do want to get pregnant and one if you don't. And I told her I do want to get pregnant. So she put me on like birth control for a few months to shrink the cysts. And then when it was time to try to conceive, I was on Clomid. So I think they let you take Clomid for 3 months. So I took it for the 3 months. I kept getting I kept getting negative pregnancy tests. And finally on the third round of Clomid, I got pregnant, which was a blessing in and of itself because she explained to me that if my test came back negative after the 3rd round, then I would have to jump up to a different level of infertility treatments, which basically was like in vitro. There wasn't any kind of middle ground between the Clomid pill and in vitro. So I got pregnant with my oldest, healthy pregnancy, healthy labor, had him in November 2009, and then wanted to get pregnant after about 2 years. So I tried again and conceived in January 2011, and probably a few weeks later miscarried. And that was really sad. I was hoping, to conceive a second child. And I mean, I did, but I lost that baby. And so that was sad. And unexpectedly, I don't even remember the details, but I remember I needed to get sized for a bridesmaid's dress because I was going to be in a wedding that summer. So I took another pregnancy test a few weeks later and it was positive again. So I talked to my midwife who had been with me during my first pregnancy, and we went through some blood tests, and she was trying to figure out if it was remnants of the previous miscarriage, or if it was a new pregnancy. And based off just some blood work or HCG level, she determined it had been a second pregnancy, a second miscarriage. So that was heartbreaking. I remember in that season just feeling just really down on myself, like something's wrong with me. I can't conceive anymore. Clomid was the help, but I had been so hopeful that I would be able to conceive and maintain a healthy pregnancy because my cycles had gotten much more regular after I had my first son. And I didn't know what was happening with my body. I just felt really discouraged. So I took a few months off of trying to actively conceive, just to pray and seek healing and just seek wisdom on, I don't know what to do. And then I don't know why this is the verbiage, but they told me if I were to miscarry again, then I would be labeled as a spontaneous aborter, which is just a terrible name, I think. I'm like, who decided to call it that? So took 3 months off of trying to actively conceive. And then at some point found peace again with being willing to try. So tried again in about July or so of 2011 and got pregnant with my second son. So this pregnancy, I went to 37 weeks and I had a healthy little boy, Chase, who was born on March 14th, 2012. And was just really grateful to welcome a second baby into our home. My oldest at the time was about 2.5 or so. And life was just fun. I loved being a boy mom. I loved just having brothers and watch them play and just the love and the relationship they were growing in. So fast forward now, it's Chase's birthday. We're celebrating his 1 year and life is fine. Life is fantastic. I'm enjoying being a mom of 2 boys. 7 days later, Chase starts to run a fever and we don't know what it is. We end up taking him, I end up going to the emergency room with him and they said nothing, he didn't have anything per se. They're like, just, keep him hydrated, give him a Tylenol, and all the things. So I did that for 2 days, kind of just watched him. His temperature would go down. His temperament started to come back to him acting like his normal, jolly, chubby-cheeked self. And so on a Saturday morning, March 23rd, 2013, I went to go lay him down for a nap. And about an hour later, I went back in to check on him, just to kind of check his temperature. And I was going to give him some fluids. And this is when the worst story of my life begins. I picked Chase up out of the crib and he wasn't breathing. Well, I couldn't tell that at the time. My mom had to kind of lean in and tell me because my heart was beating too fast to hear anything, honestly. And so she leaned her cheeks down to his lips and she said, I don't think I hear his heart and his lips are cold. And so we scramble. I grab Chase out of her hands and I run him into the living room and attempt to performing CPR on him. Someone else in the house that's there, another adult, goes and takes my oldest son upstairs. Someone else calls an ambulance. They call 911. It's just kind of all a blur. And I remember performing CPR. And at some point, I remember the ambulance and the EMTs arriving and coming in and kind of scooping Chase up. And I followed them into the ambulance. And we get to the hospital. And I just remember being in the emergency room and they're doing all these things, different tests. And I wasn't really sure what was going on. I remember riding in the ambulance and praying, okay, if he hasn't been breathing, that means oxygen has not gotten to his brain in a long time. So Lord, I need you to give me strength to raise like a brain damaged child. I need your strength. I need your support. I need your wisdom. And I just wouldn't let myself think about anything worse than a brain damaged child. But at the hospital, at some point, a woman comes over to me and says, I'm sorry. And so I scream and my mom is there. She didn't ride in the ambulance, but somehow she's there. I don't remember how she got there, but I kind of collapse into her arms and just scream and start to cry over this reality that I've just been told that my child, my 1-year-old baby, has passed away. So I go over to where Chase is and give him a kiss on the forehead and just kind of try to hold him for a little bit. And then all I remember next is being ushered out of that room and into the chapel space. And someone is asking me, do I want to call my pastor? Someone else is there and she's beginning to ask me about insurance information and date of birth and, what Chase's birth weight and all these just different questions. And so that thus we are ushered into just the tragic loss of a child. So from there, and I can talk more about just how life was in those early days and months of grieving the loss of a baby. And I had always called Chase my miracle baby because he was the baby who I got pregnant with and birthed after those 2 miscarriages. And so he always just felt like this ray of hope. And so I just didn't understand why the Lord would now take him. It didn't make sense to me. And then to add more confusion to my heart, about a month later, I was about to go on this cleanse, this detox to try to help cleanse my body, to try to help grief move through my body. And I had done this cleanse before. But for some reason this time I was like, well, I just want to take a pregnancy test to make sure that I'm not pregnant. I had no reason to be pregnant. There was no part of me that thought I was pregnant. But I took a pregnancy test. I don't know why. And I took it in the bathroom of a Target, and it came back positive. And this is maybe 4 weeks into loss, into grieving Chase. And so I'm just extra confused now. I'm grieving my 1-year-old son, and now I'm pregnant again. And I'm frustrated and confused because I'm like, I don't want another baby. I wanted Chase. I want my baby that I don't have. So that was just weird. And I talked to my midwife, and she, I had never planned to try to get pregnant. It was not at all. And I was like, I don't know what happened. I don't know why this is happening. I've been tracking my cycle. And she explained that sometimes in grief, it can throw things off, and you can ovulate earlier or later or whatever. But she just encouraged me to lean into all the grief that was coming my way and try to process it as best I could so that it would not as negatively affect the baby in my womb. So that's what I tried to do. And that actually is where my whole health passion it was actually birthed out of grief. It was in that season where I began to understand, my thoughts affect my body, affect my emotions, affect my spirit. Like all of this is tied together. So for the sake of this child that was now growing in my womb, I wanted to try and be as healthy as I could for the growing baby, but also so I could be a somewhat whole and present mother if and when I was able to welcome this baby into my life as well. So I started to try to eat really clean, and I had friends around me that I tried to, I used to call it a brain dump. I would be really, I would probably share too much, but I would just be very explicit about what was going on in my head. And I would just have them help me to discern, is this true? Is this God's voice or not? I'm like, I think my child died because I did something wrong. And they were quick to say, no, that's not how God's voice sounds. Like, that's not true. Rather than focusing on that, maybe you should focus on this. And I'd go, okay, I'll trust y'all because I just don't feel like I'm strong enough to be able to discern truth from lies right now. So I walked this day by day, moment by moment walk during that season of grieving Chase, but also trying to care well for myself and my third child, well, really my fifth child in my womb. So I do end up having a healthy pregnancy. I birthed Callan, my third son, in December of 2013, not even 9 months after Chase's, what we call his glory day, the day that he went to be with the Lord. And so now I'm welcoming another child, and it's really scary because everything I do with Callan reminds me of things I did with Chase, and I walk in a lot of fear because somewhere in my head I reason and logic to myself incorrectly, but I reason, I must have done something wrong with Chase. So if I do things differently with Callan, then maybe it'll go better. And so it was a really fragile walk, a really fragile time trying to welcome and care for this new baby boy. I remember being really scared on Christmas Eve the following year because that Callan was now the number of days old that Chase was when he passed. And so it was a really terrifying day, but we made it through. The Lord made it. We made it through, and Callan survived. I think there was just this omen that I thought, I don't know, once he gets to 374 days or 75 days, maybe he's not going to make it. But we make it past 374 and 375 and 376 and on we go. Callan is now a healthy 6-year-old boy. And then after Callan, actually right around that time, right around that 375 day mark for Callan's life outside the womb, I get pregnant again with my fourth son. And that one was a welcome pregnancy. It wasn't a surprise. I actually was hoping to try and get pregnant. I honestly, looking back, I don't know what it was. It did feel like having birthed 3 boys, but only having 2 in my arms didn't feel full. And my heart still desired for another baby. And so we tried, and I got pregnant. And thankfully, I had another healthy pregnancy with my fourth son, who I delivered in August of 2015, and his name is Kai. And there was less fear in the early days with Kai, but there are still always just different triggers that will remind me of things I did with Chase, and I would have to just fight through that fear and try to cling to hope and try to cling to truth and not let despair sink in or not let lies take root. And so I really tell people that I feel like I've been living this moment by moment, day by day walk for 7+ years. It's been over 7 years since Chase's Glory Day. And it has been a horrible journey at times. And there are other times where there are things of beauty in the journey. But I'm not going to lie. Like, I want Chase back. I want him. I want him in my arms. There are lots of things I've learned about the Lord, about myself, about people, about life. And I'm grateful for those lessons. But I'd like to have my son back. And so there's just different things I've had to learn and to grieve along the way. I remember reading an article early on that said the loss of a child hurts and stings, not like a gunshot wound that hurts and then it heals. It hurts like losing a limb, because there's the initial pain of the severing, and then there's the ongoing pain of the absence. And I feel that. I think that resonates with me, because each day I think about Chase, and each day I think about how old he would be, what grade he'd be in. I'm also a home educator, and so I'm always thinking about, man, I would have been, printing off these third grade papers for him, or I would have been signing him up for this karate class, or we go to the park and I'm very aware, there's 4 swings, and my children who are with me are taking up 3 of them, but Chase could be in that 4th one. And so there's always these different triggers that happen. And sometimes I find solace in the fact that Chase is in heaven with the Lord. And I think he is with his other 2 siblings that I miscarried. I don't know their gender. I didn't ever name them, but I think he's there with his siblings. And I am hopeful that I will one day see my son again. I'm hopeful that I will one day hold him in my arms again. And until that day, I'm going to continue to take this moment by moment, day by day, just walk of faith. I wholeheartedly believe, like it says in Lamentations, that the Lord does give us new mercies every morning. And so my mindset, I try to have this mindset of, okay, let me just wake up and exhaust today's new mercies, and I'll go to sleep, and I'll be confident that there'll be some new ones for me tomorrow. And I pray that I'll be able to keep doing that walk for, as long as the Lord chooses to have me here.
Amen. And I'm so happy that you took us on that journey. But I want to back up to really how you persevered through that subsequent pregnancy after you lost Chase and you welcomed your other son. Like, take us back on that pregnancy after loss journey. How really did your faith play a role in that journey? And then just really how did you manage any anxiety or fears that you had throughout that pregnancy?
Yeah, it was very hard. There had been a friend of mine prior to loss. We were in this Bible study together, and she had talked about this experiential knowledge. She challenged us. Like, do you really believe that God is who he says he is? Do you really believe that you are who he says you are? And I remember taking this mental journey of trying to kind of create almost like this wall in my mind that was constantly questioning myself. If I said God is good, I'd constantly I would ask myself, do I really believe that? And I actually did some work with the Lord to really believe that he was good, to really believe that he was sovereign, that he was in control, that he wasn't mean, that he did love me. And I find that I think some of that work prior to loss ended up serving like some kind of a balm to my soul after losing Chase, because I don't know if it was like this mental muscle that had been developed or a faith spiritual muscle. I'm not really sure. But my mind believed that. My mind did believe that God was good because I had spent time practicing believing it. And I didn't understand, though, how that made sense with the fact that my son wasn't with me anymore. I was like, I don't know how this makes sense, that God is good and Chase isn't with me. But I do know it's true. I don't know how this works. So I really tried to cling really, really hard to these truths that I knew to be true, even though they didn't make sense. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try my best to just resolve in my heart. Yes, God is good. Chase is not here. But those two things, they can coexist somehow. And so those became just these foundational pillars as I walked, because I wanted to cling to truth, and I wanted to not be taken over by the enemy. Another friend told me in grief, she's like, "Oh, friend, you are easy prey for the enemy." And I was like, what does that mean? I had reasoned that surely the enemy would take it easy on this grieving mom. Like, surely, attacks and stuff weren't coming my way. This was a big enough attack, it seemed. Like, I lost my child. And she lovingly reminded me, that's not the case. The enemy is not a gentleman. He will come after you through lies or through just different things. So what will you do? How will you remain strong? How will you withstand these attacks, in a sense? And so I really tried to dive into God's word and cling to his truth as best I could by his spirit. The scripture in Corinthians about, in my weakness and I am strong, like his power is made perfect in my weakness. I felt that, and I felt very, very weak, and I needed his strength. And I feel like he gave me a lot of strength in that season to be weak, honestly. I was able to cry a lot, and I was able to just be honest about what I was feeling and what my emotions were, and go to him for comfort. And so I think that different scriptures just became a balm to my soul in that season. And because I wanted to keep the comfort coming, and I believed little phrases in 2 Corinthians that said he is the God of all comfort, I was like, I don't know how that works, but I believe it's true. Let me lean into you as best I can. Let me lean into your word. Psalm 19 says the word of the Lord restores the soul. All right, let's see. And so I just tried to do that for the sake of myself, but really it was the baby in my womb that was pushing me to do the work. I always tell people that Callan, he really did, almost save my life. I remember before I knew I was pregnant with him, I would have chosen probably sugar as my drug of choice, to numb the pain and to not feel my sadness. But when I found out I was pregnant with him, I just decided, I can't do that. I don't want to choose sugar as my comfort. I want to try to be healthy for this baby growing in my womb. Okay, so let me try to do all these things. Lord, help me to be healthy for the sake of this baby. Because as much as I'm confused and really don't want this baby, I do want this baby. Like, I don't want to lose this baby. And so it was a daily fight to try to find some kind of truth, some kind of hope to hold on to. And it was hard. But I think giving someone, maybe my midwife or just different people around me, giving me that freedom to cry, to confess, to feel all the feels, I think that was a really beneficial thing for me, because someone helped me to understand, hey, God can handle all that you're feeling. You don't have to be afraid to take it to him. You can be anxious and run to him. You can be mad and run to him. You can be irritated. And so I think I tried to practice feeling all my emotions and taking them to the Lord. And I feel like the picture of what I felt like a broken little girl, like in the lap of her father, like banging on his chest because she's hurt and she's frustrated that he would do something so mean. Because I thought, like, maybe you didn't take Chase, but you allowed this to happen. So I don't understand why. And I'm mad at you. I'm beating on your chest. But there was also some part of me that knew this is also a safe place for me too. I also can find comfort here in the midst of my frustration with this God. So that's what that looked like. My husband and I ended up going to counseling together about a month after Chase passed, which was probably right after I found out I was pregnant with Callan. And so that was another thing, another tool in that season that helped give me permission to feel and to lean into the waves of sorrow and to not brace in the midst of the anxiety. I remember telling my counselor as we approached my due date with Callan that I was just so scared. I was so scared to birth this baby because what if this baby wasn't alive? Or I had group B strep with Chase, and I ended up having a positive test with Callan as well. And so I remember breaking down and just telling him, like, I'm terrified. Like anything that's similar in this pregnancy with Callan, that's like my pregnancy with Chase, this is terrifying because it just seems like it's going to end the same way. And his response to me was, well, one, you don't know that. Like, you don't know the future. You're bracing yourself. You're causing yourself anxiety and fear off of a reality that you don't actually know to be true. So his encouragement was, so rather than doing that and bracing yourself for what you think is going to turn into tragedy, maybe you can calm yourself down in a moment and remind yourself that in whatever situation you end up in, God will be there with you. And I was like, okay, so I'll try to remember that. And so as I dealt with these different fears that would come up, I would try to practice breathing and calming myself down and reminding myself of, you are afraid of a reality that you don't know if it's going to be your reality. So, like the counselor said, try to remind yourself that wherever you go, God is going to be with you in that moment. And so that was probably one of the helpful things for me as I dealt with fear and anxiety, now pregnant after having lost a child.
Ooh, that's good. I love that. And that can apply to all areas of our life, right? Not just during that. So,
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, especially what's going on now with the pandemic. Yeah. So how have your family been doing? How have you been managing through COVID-19 and this pandemic and quarantine and then now back to school? How has that been going for you and your family?
Yeah, it actually has not gone as terrible as I think I would have assumed. So we have always been a homeschool family. This is actually our first semester. We're 4 weeks into trying virtual schooling. So in the spring, when everything was changing, we were used to being home already. We were used to doing school. So that didn't feel like a huge shock. What felt like the shock was them not being able to see their friends a whole lot. And that was hard. So we tried to, get intentional with Zoom calls or phone calls or even just, hey, can we just go outside to the park and maybe wear masks, in those early days when those things were kind of still unknown. But can we do this safely, maybe with one or two friends, just so they could have some social interaction. And so throughout the summer, we put in place a schedule that we had tried to really incorporate all those different elements of health, areas of health that I mentioned. Okay, how can we make sure they get enough sleep? Are we feeding them good, healthy food? Okay, what about their own downtime? So we implemented a thing that I call solo time. I borrowed it from a friend, where basically everyone in the house at some point in the day just gets a time to be alone. They can read a book. They can just kind of rest in their room. They don't, especially my kids, they don't have their brothers bothering them or provoking them. And that's been a really helpful thing that we've implemented. I would say that the pandemic has been obviously unexpected, and we're still navigating these new waters. Like, oh, my husband does music, and so concerts aren't happening. So how can we pivot and keep going with his work? I've added a lot of things to my plate in quarantine. Actually, a lot of things are blossoming for me in this quarantine, which has been kind of a beautiful thing. Like, oh, I have a little bit more time, and we're not driving around going to the Y for these classes. Okay, well, I'll take some virtual classes that have been a long time goals of mine. So I signed up for your course to become a doula. And that was a beautiful thing that pandemic kind of allowed me to be able to do, because I was home, that the class was virtual. And I just had more time to dedicate to it. So we are still trying to figure out how to bring a sense of normalcy for the boys, but we have had to sit down and talk with them and say, this is our new normal for a while. So let's get everyone's opinions on what things we can incorporate into our schedule, into our time as a family to make sure everyone is cared for well. And I feel like we've done that, and they have been resilient in ways that I didn't expect them to be. They've grown in relationship with each other in beautiful ways, but also they've irritated each other, and there's a lot more fighting sometimes. But looking back on this season of quarantine, as hard it has been, how grievous, there's lots of things to lament, just in our nation, things that just happened in culture, so many losses. I can look back and see, man, the Lord is sustaining, and the Lord is actually growing a lot of things in quarantine that I don't think would have grown this year without it. I mentioned my being able to take your doula class early on in the pandemic. I teach fitness classes at the Y, and early on they laid everybody off. They didn't know what was going to happen. And so I started teaching virtual fitness classes, and that's been fun. That's kind of grown into a thing. I'm like, okay, yeah, that definitely wasn't a goal of 2020, but it's something that grew out of this time of pandemic and of quarantine. So I think that we are continuing to adjust well. My boys are actually really excited about virtual learning because it is a different thing for them, but they still get to be home. So there's an excitement that they have about virtual learning that is just probably different for other families because we seem to be moving in a direction that's opposite of everyone else. Everyone else is like going from being at school 5 days a week to now coming home. And my kids are like, oh, we've been at home, but we get to be on the computer now and like see other kids. So I think there's been a life-givingness that's happened a little bit with us being willing to try out virtual learning. And we're doing that because I had hoped to take this year as a homeschool sabbatical year. And it just is looking a little different than I would have expected, but we're going to keep going with it. And it gives us this unique opportunity to still have our boys at home and still do some of the things we would have normally done, while also getting a unique opportunity to peek into this school and learn about curriculum and learn about culture without having to do the full drop-off thing yet. So I think for my heart, it feels actually really good that we get this kind of slow transition into 5-day school, since we're just not used to that.
Nice. So that's good. It's a good transition for your boys, for sure. What encouraging words can you leave with our listeners, the moms who are out there who may have PCOS and may be struggling to conceive, those who have children at home, who are pregnant after loss, as we go through these uncertain times through COVID-19? What encouraging words can you leave with our listeners?
One of my favorite quotes comes from Corrie ten Boom's The Hiding Place. And I actually read the book a month before Chase passed. But one of the quotes that stood out was, she said, "There are no what ifs in the will of God." And I don't know about you, but I can find myself in just various seasons playing the what if game. Like, oh, if I would have only, gone in to check on him sooner, or if I would have only fed him more organic food, or if only I did this and didn't eat like this when I was 15, maybe I wouldn't have gained the weight. Maybe I wouldn't have PCOS, whatever. My mind just starts to play all these what if games. And I feel like that quote helped to silence the voices a little bit. And it helped me to settle into, okay, there are no what ifs in the will of God. There are things that I have, control over, and I can make certain choices, but there are just certain things that were never meant to be in my domain and in my scope of power. And so I try to remind myself of that often, in that, hey, we're in this pandemic, or my body is responding this way with PCOS, or I'm trying to conceive and it's not. And rather than doing the shaming narratives to self of like, what if I would have done something different? What if I could only be better? Taking a breath and reminding ourselves, okay, it's true. There really are no what ifs in the will of God. If I do believe that He is good and He's in control, then He's got this. And that's scary. Like nothing about that is, you're not saying it's easy, but it does, for me, it has provided a sense of, okay, I can exhale a little bit, because I really am. I am sure that He's good. I am sure that He's got me. And a psalm that goes along with that is one of my favorites. I try to live a life like this. It is Psalm 131, and it's really short, and it says, "Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. Instead, I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a weaned child. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forever. This is my go-to psalm. It really does. For me, I don't know if I'm a type 1 on the Enneagram. My dad sometimes calls me a control freak. I want to control things and I want them to go my way. And this psalm just reminds me, hey, don't get yourself involved in things too great and too wondrous, too mighty for you. Rather, the scope and domain that you do have a little bit of control over, focus your efforts there. Make good choices there. Trust the Lord in those spaces and calm and quiet your soul, knowing that God has got you, even in the unknown, even in the uncomfortable, even in the pain. He's got you. So that would be my encouragement that I tell to myself often, but that I would leave with other moms as they face infertility, PCOS, pregnancy after loss, pandemic, new normals. Like that is what I would encourage moms towards.
Oh, that's a word. That is a word. So where can our listeners connect with you after this episode?
I am on Instagram. My handle is Danielle.L.Anderson, DANIELLE, and then Anderson spelled with an O-N. That's the primary social media tool I use right now. That's where I've been announcing different fitness classes that I'll do online. Sometimes I'll do some IG live yoga classes. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing your story and your light. And I can't wait till you finish up your doula certification and be an
so
official
excited.
Sisters-in-Laws doula.
I can't wait. I'm so excited. I do have 2 women who I think I'll be able to be, doula for them at their births. So I'm so excited. They reached out and, so I'm just looking ahead on the calendar, like, okay, if I can get these 2 births, I'll read my books, write my papers, do my business stuff, and I can submit my coursework to you.
Awesome. I'm so excited for you, and I'm so honored and grateful that you are able to share your story on an episode. So thank you again for sharing your story and your light with our listeners.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. For show notes, go to sistersinloss.com to stay connected with us and join the Sisters-in-Laws community and receive my weekly newsletter. Please go to sistersinloss.com/newsletter. That is sistersinloss.com/newsletter. Please rate and review this episode, and I will talk to you next week.